Νομίζω ότι είναι ώρα να αρχίσουμε. Θέλω να δώσω το λόγο στην εκλεκτή προσκεκλημένη μας, την κυρία Αν.Lat Lapidot, είναι από το Ισραήλ, είναι διδάκτορ πολιτικών επιστημών και θα μας μιλήσει από την πλευρά ενός τρίτου, όχι ενός Έλληνα, κυρίως για την Τουρκία και το παιχνίδι το οποίο κάνει στην ευρύτερη περιοχή. Το λόγο σε εσάς.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me and to have this opportunity to speak to this in front of such a respectable audience. And I would like also to apologize for doing it in English and not in Greek. Although I was told by my colleagues many times never to start with an apology, my mother-in-law is sitting here, so I have to. My presentation deals with one aspect of the discussion today. It deals with only one actor, and that is Turkey. And mainly it deals with the regional strategy of the Turkish AKP government. I argue in front of you that in contrast to the consistent and somewhat presumptuous rhetorics of the Turkish various agencies which emphasize Turkish important role in the Eastern Mediterranean, in reality what we see is strategic retreat, constant strategic retreat, and the collapse of the very fundamentals of the Turkish regional strategy. Let me start by reminding us what this strategy was constructed and why it was constructed. And in short, I will explain that Turkish regional policy was created for three main reasons. The first one was an internal one, and I will divide the internal one to legal aspects and to social-economic reasons. As far as social-economic reasons, we must remember that the new party that came to power in 2002 is backed by a new middle-class, conservative, very young businessman that consists today a large part of the party's support group. They are ambitious, they are not very experienced in international zones, but they are very ambitious and they have an appetite for economic success. As for the legal aspects, one has to remember that while internal debates in Turkey and policies are limited by Turkish law, even today Kemalist laws are in position, foreign affairs were a space traditionally open for variations. Relations with the Arab world, the US, and mainly Israel, therefore, tend to be an important arena for the Justice and Development Party in its internal struggle with the Kemalists in general and the military in particular. The second reason that I would like to mention was the need to meet the threats, but also the opportunities that emerged in the wake of the American invasion to Iraq in 2003. The end of the Cold War and the US response to 9/11 attacks have changed the geopolitical environment, bringing Turkey face to face with new threats, but also bringing what was considered by Turkey as new opportunities. As an example for problems, I will mention the Balkanization of Iraq, the fact that the Kurds turned into an important political factor, and the growing influence of the Shia and Iran. Among the opportunities, of course, one has to remember the new regions that were now open for Turkey, Central Asia, the Caucasus, and later on the Middle East. No longer, of course, this region was no longer under Russian-American constant contest. So it was seen as relatively open for Turkish new ambitions and role. The third reason has to do with the wish to create a new regional power equation. Turkey's response under successive AKP governments has been to pursue a new foreign policy which aims to transform Turkey into an independent regional soft power. This new foreign policy approach has led Turkey to develop a neighborhood policy which requires zero problems and maximum cooperation with its neighbors. To these regional-minded policies and ambitions, I would like to add an important foreign policy aim, probably the most important goal of Turkish foreign policy, and that has to do with the US and the attempt to get rid of the old Cold War formula that Turkey was binded by, and that is the formula that the US posed for many years: cooperation in return for economic and military support. Thus, when we are trying to analyze the success or the retreat of Turkish strategy, ultimately we need to ask ourselves if indeed today Turkey can operate independent policies without or in spite of American and NATO positions. Regional policy was constructed or based on three main principles: regional economic integration, adoption of multilateral approach, also called cooperative security, and asserting Turkish role in the Eastern Mediterranean through pro-activism, very proactive diplomacy. These three principles are well connected, they are not isolated one from another. The adoption of cooperative security, what we call multilateral approach, sought to use institutional building, conflict mediation tools, multilateral diplomacy and economic interdependence as stabilizing mechanisms and as an instrument to realize Turkish regional power aspiration. One aspect of this policy was the plan to turn Turkey into a hub for energy, transportation, business, research, and more. This is probably the most successful part of this regional strategy. Successful, but also risky. I think that it is important to remember and to note that in spite or in addition to the instrumentalization of the identity politics in Turkey and of the emotional load attached to it when Cyprus, Israel, or Gaza, the Palestinians in general, is involved, Turkish approach to the region is also the result of contradicting logics from which Turkish policy suffers from. Turkey oscillates constantly between imperial logic, whose purpose is to position Turkey as an hegemonic actor on the regional level, as an important player on the international level, and universal logic that is based on peace, morality, and justice, according to Turkey. In order to reconcile these contradicting logics, the Turkish government adopted a strategy in which public opinion and sometimes outrage against immoral states is being manipulated and being projected into foreign behavior. Furthermore, such policy serves Turkish claims for regional and ethical superiority. I can give you two examples, and that is the position of Turkey on the vote of the Greeks, Cypriots on the Annan plan, and of course, constantly they're trying to explain the world and everyone else that Israel is an immoral, barbaric state because of its treatment of the Palestinians. Indeed, one important aspect of Turkish foreign policy is the Islamic ethical logic, translated by Turkey into what they call liberal discourse or human rights discourse. When asking if Islam is playing a role in Turkish approach to foreign policy and the region, we should remember that religion today is often interpreted through political agents and popular movements, not religious institutions, not theologians, not ulama. It allowed parties like AKP to elevate their moral and national social agenda to the global arena, offering bonds between all Muslims. Thus, AKP's agenda is Islamic in its attempt to create both a diagnosis of world illnesses that point to Western faults and to build new hierarchy of morality and power in the world in which Muslims take important part. But more important, Turkey was hoping to gain Muslim support to its claims for power because A, it is argued that Turkey is more democratic than any other country in the Muslim world. We forget that there are countries like Indonesia, but let's not confuse ourselves. And if this argument is not good enough, Turkey presents itself as the most important Sunni country, and not only a Sunni country, but also a Sunni country that is a member of NATO. The Muslim world clearly has not demonstrated much sympathy to the Turkish demand in the case of Cyprus. Cyprus was never neither a unifying cause nor an engine to elevate Muslim unity like the case of the Palestinian situation. Perhaps because of it, Turkish policy is highlighting the proximity of the two conflicts constantly. In such new equation, there is false universalism that gives Western powers hegemony on one hand and Muslim underrepresentation that prevent the Palestinians, the Bosnians, the Turkish Cypriots from receiving fair treatment on the other. In the eyes of Erdogan, Davutoglu, or Ibrahim Kalin, the only way to convince the Muslims around the world that they are not isolated from the international community and system is by both changing the attitude of the Western states towards symbolic places of conflicts. Cyprus and Palestine is two examples of it, and by, of course, admitting Turkey, the only Muslim European democratic state, into the EU, and as a respected member in major international institutions. Short of that, they argue, peace and stability, as well as ethic and morality, would not be installed. So it is argued. And sometimes, not only in Turkey, but also in Sweden, the US, and other places. Turkish policy makers hold the convictions that there is a need to change the international institutional system in order to gain Muslim confidence and to prevent further estrangement with the West. This was also the position about Iran. The Turkish policies towards Syria, Israel, Egypt, and Cyprus are, according to AKP government, a reflection of the people's will and conscience. And today, in a democracy, a government or governing agencies cannot have foreign policy that is alienated from the will of the people. Erdogan's statement about Israel, Egypt, Syria, and others, and the public debate in Turkey that followed should be seen in the context of Turkey's changing self-perceptions vis-à-vis the neighbors and the Muslim world. Increasingly, Turkish political elite has a vision of their nations as a moral leader of both the Middle East and the Muslim world. They see themselves assuming a burden inherited from their Ottoman past, whose empire stretched from North Africa to Europe and Central Asia, with the mission of establishing regional peace and stability, as well as economic prosperity. Turkish historical and cultural ties with countries and peoples in the Balkan, Caucasus, Central Asia, and of course the Eastern Mediterranean provided Turkey with an opportunity and responsibility to play the role of mediator in regional conflicts and contribute to peace and stability between Israel and Syria, various tribes in the region, in Iraq, in other places, in Lebanon, and of course in places where there is a divide between secularist and religious movements, for example, in Egypt. However, Turkey still has a range of unresolved problems with most of its neighbors, starting with Greece and We can move to the Kurdish area, to Armenia, Syria, Iran, almost everyone in the neighborhood. Another aspect of Turkey's neighborhood policy is trade and economic cooperation. Perhaps it's the most important aspect of Turkish foreign policy. Although the EU is still Turkey's most important trading partner, its neighborhood is emerging on the east, is emerging as another important trading partner. This is why engagement and in opposed to isolation is one of the main instruments of Turkey's neighborhood policy. However, some of the actors Turkey engaged with do raise some doubts among NATO members and others. This is why Erdogan and the Group were hoping to avert the criticism by finding a way to coordinate its efforts in the East with efforts of Western allies, the EU. One way to do it was by linking policies of the EU with those of Turkey through European neighborhood policy that was developed in 2004. The aim of this policy, the European policy, was to minimize confrontation with the southern side and the eastern side of the Eastern Mediterranean, and of course to gain economic gains. Instead of confrontation, Turkey was hoping to strengthen its relations with the EU through what she can present as some strong contacts that nobody else has with the Middle East and the Muslim countries. Because the European policy, neighborhood policy, was the main source of soft power for the European Union in the region, and the action plans were the instrument of engaging with such countries like Algeria, Egypt, Georgia, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Libya, Morocco, the Palestinian Authority, Syria, Tunisia, and others. Turkey thought that the EU is unable to complete its mission without Turkey itself. No one else can be better than Turkey to serve in this position. So everyone will be happy. Turkey will be happy because it will have a role. The EU will be happy because without Turkey they don't have mechanisms and ability to get engaged with this region. So it was hoped, naturally, the Arab Spring swamped the shores of the Eastern Mediterranean and ruins Turkish sandcastles, at least some of them. The ability of Turkey to influence the regimes in North Africa or the Levant is very minimal, let's admit it. And finally, we should remember that the importance of the Eastern Mediterranean was in itself a result of a Turkish realization that Turkey was pushed aside by Russia in certain areas like the Caucasus and Central Asia, and it was pushed by the European Union from the Balkans. So the only place where Turkey could play a role was the Eastern Mediterranean. So that for itself is a proof for retreat and not for success. The new Easternization, or Middle Easternization of foreign policy of Turkey is a direct result of this failure vis-à-vis Russia, Iran, the EU, and perhaps even the US. The aim of this policy was to establish a new stage, a new arena, in which Turkey can play a role, and those stages are starting to narrow down. Once Turkey will establish its status in the Eastern Mediterranean, so it was believed, it will be acknowledged by significant powers in the world, mainly the US, and more important, it will be able to establish independent policies and release itself from the old formulas that the public in Turkey didn't like so much. It's worth noting that internal anti-American discourse and Euroscepticism in Turkey well match the new attempts at establishing independent foreign policy. In order to establish itself in the neighborhood with which Turkey neither had previous interests nor allies, with the exception of course, Israel for a short period, pro-activism was required. Indeed, pro-activism in the Eastern Mediterranean suited the neo-Ottoman outlook of the new elite. It was a tool for shifting foreign policy discourse from the traditional hardcore security-related issues to a new sort of a new liberal outlook, or, if you want, ethical outlook. One that suited the self-perception of this new elite in Turkey. In their analysis, supremacy was to be gained by establishing soft power, regional political stability that suited the needs of the growing Turkish economy and the search for new markets. It was also assumed that Turkey is able to create new solutions in the region for various conflicts. By doing so, it will gain the status of regional power. For a short while, it looked as if the energetic, proactive diplomacy raises some fruits. However, in 2009, problems started to become evident. First, it was Israel that refused to accept a new actor in the Eastern Mediterranean. IDF operations in Gaza, Davos, the incident of Davos, the Mavi Marmara incident are well known. But it was the Arab Spring that forced Turkey to realize that its policies were ambitious, romantic, and not realistic. It forced Turkey to acknowledge its limitations and to rethink its policies. After all, the only fortress that Turkey still has is Gaza. Furthermore, and even there, it's limited. Furthermore, the events in Syria and the situation in Iraq forced the return of hardcore security issues. Terrorism, missiles, border security, etc. The attempt to introduce liberal outlook failed. More important, Turkish strategy aimed to create an independent policy in the region, and thus to position itself as a central regional power. However, Turkey is now forced to work closely with global powers and to accept its inabilities to determine the future of Syria, the future of the Palestinians, the future of Egypt. I don't know what Cyprus, I will leave it to you later. And neither by becoming a model and as a guiding force on the way to democratization, nor by military means. I will leave it to you to think about the positive or the negative consequences of this shift from liberal discourse to hardcore security issues. Thank you very much.
Ευχαριστούμε την κυρία Lapidot. Καλές είναι οι φιλοδοξίες, αλλά πρέπει να ανοίγεις τα πόδια όσο σε παίρνει. Αν τα ανοίγεις περισσότερο, συνήθως κάνεις την ισορροπία σου. Ειδικά αν είσαι και καρκινοπαθής χώρα, γιατί η Τουρκία, λόγω κουρδικού, είναι καρκινοπαθής χώρα. Κάτι που δεν πρέπει να ξεχνάμε ποτέ.